Here are 7 of the most common houseplant myths that almost everyone believes, some of which could actually be hurting your plants. Hi everyone, welcome back to Gardens by Monica. Today I want to take some time and work indoors on some houseplants and talk to you guys about some of the common misconceptions out there and why they came about and what you should be doing instead. So grab your coffee and let's get talking. All right, so the first one that I hear quite often is that houseplants purify the air. And right now I'm surrounded by quite a few houseplants and I can tell you that's not a true statement. So this misconception was actually started back in the late 1980s when NASA put out a study where plants reduced the amount of VOCs in the air. And VOCs are just a fancy term for chemicals that evaporate in the air at room temperature. The problem with it is that the study was done in ideal conditions, so in sealed chambers. Well, none of our homes are sealed. We have windows and doors and HVAC systems and all sorts of other things that allow air circulation to come through, which is a good thing because we need our house to breathe and not mold. But more recent research has actually shown that you need something like thousands of houseplants per square meter for it to actually have an impact on your air quality. So it's actually not realistic. However, recent studies have shown that plants actually do reduce stress, lower blood pressure, and increase overall general well-being. So while they don't necessarily purify the air, they can make you quite a bit happier. All right, myth number 2 is schedules. So as humans, we tend to love to simplify things and do things on a schedule, and that doesn't really work for plants for a couple of reasons. One reason being that different plants like different types of moisture levels. So for example, here I have a streptocarpus. These like to be consistently moist. They do not like to dry out. So I actually have a special pot for it that allows the water to consistently seep in through the main pot while the larger pot is filled with water so that it never dries out, because I will never remember to water this thing every single day. Something like my philodendron, though, really likes to get bone dry before it gets a rewatering. This does not like to have wet feet, which means that it doesn't like its roots to constantly be sitting in water. It does not like to be constantly moist because otherwise it is going to get root rot. This needs to be watered at least maybe once every week and a half to 2 weeks or so, depending on the conditions within my house. So if I were to water both of these guys only on Mondays, for example, neither one of them would have their needs met and they probably both would end up just perishing. So how can you tell if you have a plant that needs to stay consistently moist versus something that needs to dry out in between waterings? Well, sadly, most of the time, those plant tags really don't tell you what you really need to know. So the best thing that I would advise is either your friend Google or your local garden centers. They will point you in the right direction. The other reason why watering on a schedule may not work for you is that if you are watering on a consistent schedule, you may experience a lot of root growth, which means that you're now going to need to start watering more frequently. If you consistently water on Mondays and now you experience that root growth, you may now need to water every 2 or 3 days instead of every 7 days. But you're not going to realize that. You're just going to keep watering on Mondays, which means that that root is now going to start dying back, and now that plant could potentially start perishing. Myth number 3 is misting raises humidity. And my God, no, it doesn't. That mist dissipates into the air so quickly that there is no increase in humidity at all from just a couple of spritzes onto the plant. What you should do instead is have your plants either on a pebble tray that's filled with water or use something like a terrarium. So this is actually my son's terrarium. He is very, very proud of it. He's been doing a great job taking care of it. But what it basically does is it has a water reservoir at the bottom, much like a pebble tray does, and it locks the humidity inside. Now, you have to be a little bit careful in terms of what kind of plant you would put in here. This one, he has a carnivorous plant that grows in swampy conditions, so it doesn't need a lot of airflow, but you may have a plant that does need a little bit more air circulation in here. So again, do your research, Google, don't listen to the plant tags. But this is a great way to raise humidity. The misting really doesn't do much of anything. And if anything, it could even potentially create problems on your plant, such as fungal issues or spots on the leaves that you don't necessarily want to be there. All right, myth number 4 is that dust doesn't impact the well-being of the plant, and that is simply not true. So dust on the leaves, like of this ZZ plant that I have right next to me, can really impact the light absorption so that the plant can't photosynthesize the way it should, which means that it won't grow properly. So what you should do is just take a damp cloth like I'm taking and just gently wipe off the leaves. This will also help you check for pests, and then this way you can be proactive in case you find any spider mites or mealybugs or any of that sort of thing lying around. Do not under any circumstances use products like leaf shine, because leaf shine is just going to clog the pores of your plant leaves, and it's going to lead to bigger problems down the road. All right, myth number 5 is that repotting can fix your issue, and that's simply not true. So repotting is similar to you going ahead and moving houses or apartments. Think of how stressful that is. It's a similar concept for your plants. Repotting can actually be quite stressful, especially if you're doing it quite often and without necessity. So how do you know when to repot a plant? There's a couple things to consider. If it's drying out really, really quickly and you find yourself watering it very frequently, that typically means that it's pot bound or root bound and it needs to go up into a bigger pot. Now you want to go up about 2 inches in pot size. So you don't want to go from a 4-inch pot to an 8-inch pot. You want to go from a 4-inch pot to a 6-inch pot, from a 6-inch pot to an 8-inch pot. You guys are smart. You guys get the picture. Now, the other thing that could happen is you buy a pot, like I bought this one, and it may just be in too big of a container, which means that it stays wet for too long, and then the plant starts suffering. So, for example, when I pulled out this Dracaena, I hadn't watered this in weeks, and it is still very, very wet. So that tells me I need to move it into a smaller pot. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And you want to make sure when you do repot that you're getting all the air pockets out. So whether you're tapping the pot down. All right, so I actually ended up putting her not only into a smaller pot, but also into a terracotta pot. A terracotta pot is very porous, so it actually draws the moisture out of the soil, so it doesn't allow plants to sit wet for too long. So that's another thing for you to know. So if a plant like a fern would not do well in a terracotta pot, a plant like a philodendron probably does a lot better in a terracotta pot. All right, myth number 6 is that brown or yellowing leaves is a sign of the plant being in trouble. And that's just simply not true. So it can actually be a sign of a couple things. For example, on this philodendron ring of fire, I have, well, I don't even think that these are brown or yellow anymore. They're clearly just dead. But they're the oldest leaves on the plant. All you can do is pull them off and that'll be perfectly fine. Now some of these other older ones too, they're starting to discolor as well. All it means is that the plant is starting to shed its older leaves to make room for the newer ones that are starting to grow up at the top. If you are concerned that there is something wrong with the plant, for example, it's more than just 2 or 3 leaves and it's not just the older ones that are dying off, it is the newer ones, that could be a sign that there is something wrong. And that is when you want to look at the root ball. So just gently pull the plant out to take a look to see if there's any mushy roots. I'm not going to do it right now because I can see that this is going to be stuck to the end of the pot and I don't want it to turn into a big project. But take a look at the root ball. If you see mushy roots, that means that the plant is getting root rot and it needs to be repotted, it needs to be taken care of, it needs to be attended to pretty much immediately. If the roots look fine or if they just look a little bit dried, that means you need to water the plant more often. So really, it's the roots that are going to tell you what is wrong with the plant, not always the top of the leaf canopy. All right, myth number 7 is watering with ice cubes, and just don't do it. Save your ice cubes for your drink. Don't water your poor plant with them. It's going to shock the plant. So all you want to do is just fill your watering can or pitcher or whatever you have with some room temperature water and water your plant with that. Save the ice cubes for something else. All right, so which myth surprised you guys the most? Or did I completely forget to mention one? So leave those in the comments below. Also, if you guys want to stick around and watch more houseplant videos, I'll make sure to link them right here so you guys can continue to watch along. And if you like this sort of content, make sure to like and subscribe and share with your friends and family if you think that they would also enjoy it. With that, I'm going to close today's video. I will see you guys on Friday for some outdoor container updates. Bye.